This is XTP Media.
Welcome back to the Partnership Edge, the podcast that unlocks the secrets of successful partnerships and alliances. I'm Peter Johnson from XTP, and today we speak with a leading local government chief executive. Dr Martin Reeves is one of local government's most respected chief execs, known for using partnership and innovation to drive regeneration and reform. He led Coventry City Council for 14 years, playing a central role in the city's transformation and its successful bid to become the UK City of Culture in 2021. He also helped shape regional devolution through the West Midlands Combined Authority. Martin has held influential national roles, including President of Solace, Trustee of the Coventry City and Culture Trust, Board Member at the Centre for Cities and a Governor of Coventry University. He has repeatedly been named among the Local Government Chronicle's 50 most influential people. Martin is now Chief Executive of Oxfordshire County Council and bringing that experience of rebuilding places through trusted partnerships to one of the country's most high-profile counties. I met Martin just before he left Coventry at a BSA event on the National Procurement Strategy for Local Government. He was so compelling, those early discussions formed the basis for me to push forward with my work on trusted partnerships. Martin is one of the most dynamic and engaging chief execs around. I hope you enjoy this feature. Martin, welcome to the Partnership Edge.
Thanks for inviting me. I've been really looking forward to this, Peter.
Well, we met back in Coventry a few years ago and we connected over the importance of partnerships. And so I'm delighted you can join me today and share some of those experiences. Let's kick off straight away with Coventry, Martin. You were credited with helping to rebuild Coventry over more than 10 years. When you look back, where did trust between the authority, business and the communities make the biggest difference to what you were able to do together?
I think you're giving me far too much credit for building what is an incredibly proud medieval city. I like to think, looking back now, with Coventry over that almost 15 years I was there, is I played a small part as one of the leaders in there, but alongside genuinely inspirational local elected members, incredible global businesses, two amazing universities, and yes, a really proud municipality and city council that with its communities wanted to say, which is to the heart of the bit about trust. Well, so actually, with all the assets we've got, with the proud history we've got, but a future that wants to feel very different and vibrant for all of our communities, we need to be better, literally, together on not just physically and economically regenerating Coventry, but socially thinking about how we can move forward in a really much more positive way. And I think really it lays to the heart of this kind of trust in an ambition and aspiration that to some felt quite audacious, about really being a big hitter and punching well above our weight, but actually about the city council couldn't do that on its own. It could lay down really strong ambition for the future. It needed that clarity of vision over the long term, a determination to get there, a city that was incredibly robust and remains robust, incredibly proud, ingenious in so many ways, but understanding the best of the commercial, public sector, communities themselves, voluntary sector, government, eventually a combined authority with a mayor, to think about how we could lift all of that and trust each other with that long-term plan and an envision to really make sure that when we got knockbacks, which we inevitably did and made mistakes, there was a bond, if you like, the best phrase I can use, a bond about that was what was going to keep us motivated to move forward. Yeah. And I think the evidence is very clear that worked.
And we've talked many times about shared ambitions, shared goals, shared targets for alliances and partnerships. Is that what truly brought that very disparate group of public, private and third sector organisations together? I miss the politicians.
No, and politicians and the power of political leadership at local, regional, national level is always absolutely key to this. the reality here is, and it does go to the heart of trust, collaboration, which are really big words that are used a lot. They are hard earned and they're easily broken as bonds that I've mentioned before. And it's completely legitimate, not just in my work in Coventry, but now as we talk about my work here in Oxfordshire, is actually every organisation, and I would argue every individual that's got a role within those organisations has what I call legitimate bottom line. They want to get certain things out of a relationship, a transaction, a collaboration over a long period of time. So that point about how do you hold very often what appears to be very diverse, different, disparate set of organizations, people together is that honesty, the root early conversation about what does great look like for you?
Yeah.
What are your walkaway positions of which, people talk about red lines, don't they, Peter, in commercial terms? But I think that's true socially for our communities. What are you not going to give away? What will you never, ever erode and will always put at the top of your list? What are you prepared to compromise and understand? But above all, and this is the point about how you hold this together, can we agree about what I call that unifying coalition, almost like the North Star? What is it is going to guide us that we do agree on, which is
Yeah.
worth the fact that at times we're going to feel like we're not quite getting out of this relationship exactly what we would like, but over time we hold it together because we're absolutely conjoined by that strategic intent. Does that
Yeah.
make sense? I think that's what
Yeah.
I've seen working in places across the country that I've been involved in.
Let me come back, Martin, on the point about the red lines. It's quite a fascinating one, actually, and it intrigues me a lot. Coming from most recently a business development and a growth background, saying no is not something that people are comfortable with. Is that red line point that you made earlier, is that about saying, hang on a sec, I've got a problem? Because I talk about vulnerability, particularly in the white paper, and vulnerability in our sector is seen as weakness. But in reality, vulnerability is about honesty, it's about openness, early risk identification, and saying, hold my hand up, I've got a problem here. It doesn't happen so much in some of the big one-to-one private-public sector alliances because they're so contractual and transactional. Help me to understand a little bit more about that early risk identification and that honesty around that. How does that work in such a complex environment as you operate in?
It's a great question, Peter. You're obviously very well versed in these podcasts, aren't you? But it's important, and I will answer that with where you kind of ended it, which is this sense of if anyone in any kind of collaboration, relationship, procured, commission, voluntary way, if they believe that the red lines are only ever understood by page turning with legal colleagues, that's not the red lines I'm talking about. Yeah, there's always contractual, legal, which we should all protect. I'm talking about red lines where in the very earliest opportunities to try and create, is there something we can build together in the long term to be able to, your point, it's not vulnerability, it's strength to say, look, here, I'm simply not going to be able to take my shareholders, my stakeholders, my vested interests forward if I don't get X, Y, Z. Equally, I'm very comfortable to negotiate. That is always best done on day one, not day 5 or 10 or on page turn. The failure comes when that is not exposed honestly, because here's the truth. In those earliest possible stages, and I've seen this play out in commercial transactions and relationships, voluntary, really quite innovative partnerships that I've been lucky enough to be part of. If you don't at that point do that, it is at that point completely legitimate, for example, to realize that the partners you've brought together, there are too many blockages. And actually, the thing about trust, which people don't understand, sometimes it's right and legitimate to say, we're not going to move forward in partnership because actually this doesn't feel right at this stage. However, you keep the relationship strong to be able to maybe grab an opportunity in the future.
Yeah.
What I worry about is people presume that collaboration, partnerships, trust is about always, to your point, saying, yes, we've got a deal, we can transact, we can transform together. Sometimes it's saying we just got too many contradictory red lines here. We're not clear enough about where we want to go. Because if you don't do that earliest on, Peter, and your white paper is very clear on this, what happens is there is no procurement route, commissioning route in the world that will optimize that.
Yeah.
So you've got to start early. But look, it's one of the most toughest things as a human being to go very early on when you're fledgling in your work saying, this is where I'm at, this is me. And it might feel awkward and uncomfortable to say at a point, but I've got to get it out now. And I wish all of us in public sector, commercial sector, voluntary community sector, as individuals and leaders, is feel much more empowered and comfortable in that. And then the amazing structures, procurement routes, lawyers, commercial people can work their magic to deliver vehicles which deliver that optimally. But you can never sacrifice and surrogate that exact building of honesty and trust, even if in the earliest stage of escalation, it looks like it means there's no future in that particular deal at that point.
Interesting stuff. Really enjoyed that bit. Thanks, Martin. When we met in Coventry, I think one of the things that had happened to me is I'd walked out the train station into that amazing plaza, new council premises, I think hotels, restaurants. And I literally was like, is this Coventry? Because when I was here 7 or 8 years ago, I was frightened for my life walking through that tunnel. Sometimes the word transformational is used a little bit too easily, but genuinely there was. How did you develop that, particularly with the private sector, to bring something that was, how can we say this, it was not in a great place a decade or so before, to what I saw when I walked out of that train station?
Now, you listen, you're absolutely right, Peter, that anybody that's tracked, I would say, a number of post-industrial cities in the UK, but particularly one that I was lucky enough to be part of in Coventry, would say that emblematically, symbolically, if you like, areas of mixed use, regeneration around the railway station is a symbol for a vibrant, futured city. Or in the case of Coventry, which was very honest, actually something that looked less ambitious, more like a growing town rather than an amazing potential global city. So we being commercial partners who've already been with us around the Friargate development for a number of years. These things take so long, 15, 20 years. It doesn't happen overnight. The amazing power of the local authority, and I have to say again, literally the elected members saying that we will anchor that development as a city council to enable exactly the thing you said, the regeneration of the railway station, incredible retail that's appropriate, food and beverage, hotel, further office accommodation, and to know that that was a risk, but anchoring that long-term mixed-use development was really important. Why? Because that access, when you arrive, when you leave, the coming and goings of residents, business, investors, people that care about place, when you get that entry point, which was so transformational as you bridged over into the city centre, legibly easable, you didn't have to go to an underpass, but you felt like welcome to Coventry, a global city, should never be underestimated as a confidence boost. But actually, to your point about how does it work, you have to be futured. You have to stick to the long-term plan, because actually it requires significant private investment. It requires significant, complicated master planning. And guess what? Over a period of 15, 20 years is what it takes to deliver something as big as that. Over 1 million square foot from memory of that kind of area of Friargate around the railway station. You'll get changes in the economic cycle. You'll get investors that have come in that wish to move or change. You'll get different government policy. During that time, we had the mayoral authority arrive. So actually in that, you've got to keep focused on why here, why now, why is it so important? And I think in fact, I know it is a great study, not just on real estate and how you can do that in a really well master plan way, but it is a classic example of physical, economic, but also social regeneration. And I'm really proud. If you look around the country and other cities now, there's some really interesting similarities with what's been done to copy some of the infrastructure that came first. Yeah, that bridge you'd have walked over, Peter, over the ring road was a master of engineering. It was incredible that was done through mixed funding approaches to really link the city centre with the railway station. So it will go from strength to strength, that area.
Now, let me come back to something you mentioned there. And in a city that's been through such industrial decline and then reinvented itself, people can be quite sceptical. Humans by nature are often quite sceptical. I'm particularly keen we've talked a bit about institutions and big organisations who've got all that weight and capability and long-term vision. How about the residents who'd seen some of the changes start to occur, that skepticism they had, how did you get them on board? How did they learn to trust that alliance that you were leading?
I think that is really hard. And if you think about Coventry, its journey around, for example, that development around the railway station, if you also look at the amazing robustness and resilience of Coventry, again, for really powerful political leadership, but alliances with the commercial sector to reimagine its city centre. Because remember, that city was the first really post-war pedestrianised city centre that changed urban planning,
Yeah,
reimagine what it was to have a city centre. And then that kind of 45, 50 years later, needing to reimagine again. So all of that, guess what? You've got Coventrians, very proud people that had been promised change, transformation of its city centre, its railway station, and quite rightly saying, until I see it, I won't believe it. So that point, it's not about trust per se, it's just about a lack of belief foremost. So I think the answer is he's been honest about stuff that's not been delivered well enough in the past for any of our cities, our towns, or our counties, but then say, actually, there is a vision, there's a plan, it's deliverable. It really will practically work now. We want you to be part of it. But this is the key bit, which I think is missed. And I think we need to think from the back of your kind of white paper in the sense of trust, collaboration in long-term relationships. You do have to have, which is the answer to this question, what I call a meantime strategy. So in the meantime, people talk about
yeah,
this in regeneration terms. It will take 5, 10, 15, 20 years to deliver out fully. But in the meantime, how can you start showing those proof points? That sense of, and people talk, don't they, about diggers on the ground, spades in the ground, cranes in the air. It is about physically saying, in the meantime, we're getting going. So I would never underestimate, and we did this in Frygate near the railway station, did it in the city centre, and I'm doing it here in Oxford and Oxfordshire now. Pop-ups, the use of dormant areas as they get regenerated, using art, culture, sport, animation, pop-up, catering, food and beverage, entertainment, to lift it in the meantime, to say, look, we are proud of this place. We want you to use it, to understand it. And look what's coming. Then people start believing in it. And I think if you can include children through the primary schools, secondary, say, this is your city that
yeah,
we're
yeah,
thinking that's going to be amazing for the future, and get them reimagining it as well. That is the only way you can get there. But it's really hard because when you see delays, everything seems to take a long time. Planning, delivery, getting the money assembled, the risks understood, getting clearance. And these take a long time. So you've got to find a way in the meantime to keep that momentum, to show direction of travel, because otherwise it's not believable. You can't just say, trust us. Here's the
yeah,
plan that are 15 years later and pull off the ribbon and unveil. It has to be a gradual process, which is why master planning is so important, to get
yeah,
sequencing right, not just for the commercials, but to show people, wow, to your point, this now looks and feels so different to how I remember it. Why would I not now believe that the next stage is doable? And why would I be cynical when I've seen it in front of me today? And I think that's not maybe a profoundly complicated, but it kind of works if you can do it that way.
yeah. Now, when we last spoke, Martin, you shared some experiences with me about some of the things that didn't go right, and you had to turn some things around, and some elements of the partnerships had to be released. How do you rescue some of those tricky times? How do you rebuild trust after something is broken?
Oh wow! Again, it's not a really good question, isn't it? And you wouldn't take me down for me to be specific. I don't think I need to be, but
No.
I can remember all over my career actually, which is over a quarter of a century now. Would you believe, in working in places across the country, including where I'm now? And the truth is, as I said, sometimes with either mistakes that are made, lack of what I said earlier on about building the real sense of what does that guiding coalition look like, etc. Sometimes they're not rescuable, and I think that there's nothing you know inherently wrong with that. Sometimes damage has been done for often unintended reasons. Delay has happened, people have moved on, and sometimes there's a bravery and a boldness in saying we don't need to rescue per se, but actually continuing with respectful, kind, mutually understanding relationships, even if people are changing, or is absolutely essential. So you don't need always to find a way, But if you believe you must, and it's important to re-establish that trust, then there's only one way you can start, which is an acknowledgement. Often, if you believe a classic mea culpa, things that either individually, collectively weren't done well enough, talk about it, fess it up, be very clear, own it, be accountable and responsible for that. And I talk here in Oxfordshire, sending the county councillors, and don't then post rationalise it. Just say, we got that bit wrong. That then led to a detriment, a challenge, which is why we are where we are now. Full stop. Not, oh, but the circumstances were. Own it, be honest and authentic about that, because then that is the only way you can start rebuilding. Right. Do you, as multiple partners or single partner, now wish to reset, which is often a phrase that's overused, reimagine where we're going? And most times, if you're honest about that and learn from the reasons why you got into that position, I think is the only way. It's attritional, it's hard. And what I said right at the beginning of this podcast is like, the truth is, building those bonds of trust and transformation and long-term relationships are hard earned, but actually they're easily lost. So you have to sometimes go back over the whole process again of, is it worth sticking together now because we're literally conjoined in something that's going to be really special? So I think it's a human to human thing rather than an organization. It shows again vulnerability sometimes, but it's also the other bit I'd say just on this, it's also about calling it out. So that's within public statutory bodies, it's within the commercial sector, the community body. Actually calling out and saying, you as a partner in this relationship, even if you're not going to acknowledge it, let me tell you, your behaviour has been inconsistent. Your actions have been inconsistent with where we've agreed. Not necessarily we're just within a memorandum of understanding or commercial environment. We agreed the following, and it looks like it's dissonant from what we agreed. That's really hard to call out sometimes. But in a trusted relationship, you're able to call it out, agree it or not, put in mitigations and move on. The thing that gets us into trouble are the things that aren't said. I've always been clear about this. Strong relationships that mean and last, always, they don't just survive, they thrive through those kinds of interactions. The ones that are quite performatory, if you like, and relatively transitional and transactional are the ones that you just hold stuff. It doesn't deliver long-term sustainable outcomes. But I'm also acknowledging, right, it's really hard, to call someone out calmly, evidentially, kindly at the earliest possible opportunity. It's easier left, isn't it? Let's be honest, human beings. I do it in a family environment. You'd rather not. You'd rather not pick stuff up with my two teenage daughters. I'd rather just hope it all sorts itself out. But you've got sometimes got to get into the eye, because in a kind, trusting relationship of a family, of a collaboration, you've got to feel confident to call each other out. So I think there's all of that cocktail playing out as well, from my experience.
I think for anyone who's read the white paper, and if you haven't, there's a link in the show notes to it, can see that I spoke to you before I finished writing it. I think we shared, I plagiarised an awful lot of experience from you. But you mentioned Oxfordshire there. You're now in Oxfordshire. If another chief exec came to you and said, look, seen what you've done in Coventry, see what you're doing in Oxford and Oxfordshire, I want to rebuild too, how would you set them about starting that trust-based journey? We use the term the trust clock. How do you get them to say, right, the clock is ticking now, these are the things I think you should do? What's that advice you'd give them?
Yeah, so the first thing, without any doubt at all, is to pour. This is going to sound really strange, certainly for someone like me who doesn't really have a rear view mirror or even side mirrors. I've just got a windscreen. I just look ahead. So it's strange. And someone that believes in pace and momentum and conviction of delivery is everything. In that first bit, my advice would be just pause and reflect about what makes your place special. Because every single place, we talked about Coventry, I'm now in Oxfordshire. I've been in various parts of London, right in the heart of London, in the outer London area. I've been in Bedfordshire and Bedford. So all the different places I studied in Sheffield and Loughborough. So I know all of those, right? They are, of course, they got commonalities, but they are so unique. So the first thing is a local authority chief exec or a big leader of a place is, what is it? Just reflect on what makes us special and unique. And then almost immediately, what are the assets, which are often the people, the provenance, the history, the organisations, the anchors in that place. What is it that is absolutely essential to corral, convene, to deliver something very special? Thirdly, what is that? And I know we've talked about it. It's not. I'm not just playing homage to your white paper. It's really true. You've got to have the evidence is very clear. What is it that is strategically aligning us for the long term? And despite the fact we come from different backgrounds and organisations, what is it that's worth sticking together for? And
Yeah.
create that, but not in isolation, together. And then all of the attrition starts. What things are we going to pick off first? What's worth going after? But only after you've done those three things. And I think in that, finally, to be really honest with yourself, as in this case, a chief exec, about the things that you can influence, about things that you can't, and the things that you shouldn't. And be really clear as a chief exec of certainly local authorities about what your role is in that. And I come back to it. I'm not just doing it to be sycophantic or to play to the gallery on this podcast. The truth is, local elected members, increasingly powerful regional mayors, are absolutely essential at setting that long-term tone and providing hopefully a trusting environment in which to say to private sector investors, pension funds, equity players, big promoters, developers, house builders, regeneration specialists, partners of all types. Actually, we're here for the long term. We want to set an environment, a place that we want to do business with you, and there's value for everybody. But above all, our red line is we're not going to compromise on the people that we care most about. So we've got a vested interest in that. But the rest of it, let's build it together. And I think the power of reaching out is often a very, I think, unfair, seductive commentary about, politicians at all levels. My honest learning about trust and about long-term envisioning, it comes from incredible, brave, bold politicians who say, I'm here, this is where we're going to go, and I'm not going to take no for an answer. So they're all the tricks of the trade, really, about how you then build those coalitions. And I suppose finally on this, it's like what we've said earlier on. With being a chief exec, so in my case here in Oxfordshire, I'm lucky enough to be chief exec of an organisation that's got 5,500 people. We're like over £1 billion of kind of gross expenditure, large, big, powerful anchor organisation. But I've got to believe, on behalf of my organisation, the system, a kind of vulnerability to your point earlier on, say, actually, when we get it wrong, escalate early. If we've not been clear about what we need and what we want, fess up early again, be honest and humble in that, because organizations don't exist. It's just people. It's people coming together, hopefully inspiring each other. And I just think we forget a bit of that sometimes and hide behind big organizations and shrug shoulders and go, oh, it wasn't possible. We weren't aligned. That's just a lot of people coming together that we need to keep reminding ourselves of that as well.
Yeah. Let me wrap up then, Martin. Put you on the spot a bit. Didn't prepare for this one, but it makes me think a little bit more about inclusivity, really. Lots of people who operate in partnerships, alliances, aren't leaders. They're doing their jobs. Yes, they're aligned with those organisations. But what would you say to some of those project managers, some of those deliverers, those frontline staff who are listening to the programme today about how they should behave and support building trust in those alliances?
So for those that feel that their role to them, to your point, feels managerial, feels transactional, feels with our amazing kind of commercial surveyors, urban designers, planners, people that are just assembling a lot of the commercial arrangements. They feel as though they are hiding unintentionally a lot of time behind a Gantt chart, sophisticated project management tools. I would say to them the following. I never differentiate between those roles and the role that I'm lucky to have, where sometimes I may be at the front facing bit where I'm trying to build this trust. Because you think about it, every single one of those roles only exists to deliver that long-term view that we talked about in this podcast. And I think if you do that, what helps is I've seen some of the intensity, I've seen in my own eyes, of some of the highest profile capital programs where those very individuals are literally worrying themselves about, can we deliver? Are we running behind schedule? How we do again? So the intensity of that, the only antidote I've got, because it's really hard yards, is to remind them all the time that they are delivering something unbelievably special, that will be a legacy, physically, socially, economically, that if they've got children in the future, when they go back to that place, if they've left it, they can go, see that? I played a role in lifting that out of the ground and building something for the future for those people in that community. And I can't think of anything more powerful when you're feeling like you're just a cog in a wheel. No, you're not. You're absolutely mate. And actually lifting people up, to your point of being lead, they are leaders of that vision, and their trust to each other about saying, I've got a bit behind, I'm struggling on this, I'm worried. If we had more of that at all levels, and that more leadership, openness and vulnerability, my sense is, this is, and the white paper is very clear, we'd end up with less failures. We'd end up with earlier correction and adaptation of missed budget lines, missed capital program lines, because actually it's an open system of learning, adaptation, rapid change, renewal, and move again. And failure is not a bad thing. It's an opportunity to fail fast and then move again. I think that then delivers the vision even more coherently. So please, if you're listening to this and feel like you can't quite see what your role is, I would say you are leaders, and I don't differentiate a technical role and put it in a box. I never have done, I never will do. And I think I'll just remind you of when those ribbons get cut, when people laud the amazing physical regeneration of a place, you should be alongside that ribbon cutting, because actually that's why it comes to fruition. So I think that's the best motivator and the best honest response I can give to the amazing system configuration, which is just thousands and thousands of people often doing amazing stuff to make things happen in our places. Never forget that. Never, ever forget it.
Martin, bloody inspirational. I want to go out and rebuild my town centre now. Thank you so much for sharing those insights. Thank you for your time. Really, really enjoyed this. And I hope some of the people listening can take something too and take some of those lessons back into their workplace. Martin, thanks very much.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's the next best thing to Desert Island Discs.
If you want to learn more about trusted partnerships, go to the show notes. I work with organisations that recognise trust as a performance advantage. If you need help in bringing your partnerships work to deliver the outcomes that delivers those greater than 10% gains, our details are in the show notes. A huge thank you again to Martin Reeves for today's conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe, leave a quick review and join us next time. Until then, I'm Peter Johnson. See you on the next episode of The Partnership Edge.
This is XTP Media.